years, investors had one question about Meta's AI strategy. Why is Mark Zuckerberg spending so much money? Data centers, GPUs, superclusters, hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure. At one point, Meta's AI spending looked less like a business plan and more like an arms race. The concern was quite simple, really. What if Meta overbuilt? What if all those ships sat idle? What if the company spent more on AI infrastructure than it could ever monetize? Well, Zuckerberg seems to have just revealed the answer, and Wall Street absolutely loves it. Meta stock jumped more than 10% after reports emerged that the company is exploring a cloud business that would rent out AI compute and model access to outside customers. Meanwhile, AI cloud companies like CoreWeave and Nebius plunged because suddenly the company buying compute might become the company selling compute. And that, viewers, changes everything. Now, before we take a deeper dive into the story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Now that you have, let's get straight to it. Now, according to the sources, Meta is developing plans for a cloud infrastructure business that would allow developers and enterprises to access AI models and computing power hosted inside Meta's own data centers. The idea appears to have two parts. First, Meta could offer model access through APIs, similar to AWS Bedrock. Developers could pay Meta to run models such as MuSpark on Meta-owned infrastructure. Second, Meta could sell raw computing capacity directly, essentially becoming a supplier of AI infrastructure. And that's the part that has scared the investors in companies like CoreWeave and Nebius. CoreWeave fell more than 10%, Nebius fell more than 12%, because Meta could now become a competitor. Now, to understand why the story matters, you need to understand what happened at Amazon. Now, AWS wasn't originally built to become the world's largest cloud business. Amazon built infrastructure for itself: servers, storage, networking, compute. Then someone realized something important, that those resources did not need to sit idle. They could be rented. The result became AWS. And AWS eventually became one of the most profitable businesses in technology history. Meta now appears to be asking a similar question. If we are spending over $100 billion building AI infrastructure, why should only Meta use it? Why not rent it out? Why not create a new business altogether? Why not turn excess capacity into revenue? The bigger story here isn't cloud computing. It is AI economics. Meta has committed staggering amounts of capital to AI. CapEx guidance this year sits between roughly $125 billion and $145 billion. That is infrastructure spending on a scale previously reserved for governments and utilities. For months, investors worried that Meta was overspending. Now, Zuckerberg has effectively introduced a financial safety valve. If internal AI demand falls short of expectations, Meta can sell capacity externally. Suddenly, overbuilding becomes less dangerous because excess compute becomes inventory, and inventory can be monetized. The market reaction tells you exactly what investors are worried about. CoreWeave and Nebius built business around a very simple thesis: buy GPUs, build infrastructure, rent it out to AI companies, profit. But Meta entering the market changes that equation altogether, because Meta already owns enormous amounts of compute. Meta already buys GPUs at scale. Meta already operates some of the largest AI infrastructure on planet Earth. And Meta already happens to be one of CoreWeave's biggest customers. If Meta begins selling compute directly, two things can happen. It may need less capacity from CoreWeave, and it becomes yet another supplier competing for customers. That is why investors reacted immediately. The threat isn't AWS. The threat is that Meta becomes yet another hyperscaler. For years, AI was all about models: GPT, Claude, Gemini, Llama, MuSpark. The focus was intelligence. Now that industry is shifting. Infrastructure is becoming a business in its own right. Compute itself is becoming a tradable commodity. This is exactly what happened in electricity, exactly what happened in cloud, and exactly what happened in telecommunications. At first, infrastructure supports a product, then infrastructure becomes the product. Meta seems to be arriving at that realization. What is fascinating is that Meta isn't alone here. SpaceX recently started renting AI data center capacity as well. Anthropic, Google, others, all of them are buying access to infrastructure. The lesson is becoming increasingly clear. The winners of the AI race may be the companies that own the largest AI factories, the biggest data centers, the most power, the most GPUs, and of course, the most capacity. In other words, AI infrastructure itself is becoming an asset class. There is one major catch here. Building data centers is not the same thing as building a cloud business. AWS took decades to build. Google Cloud took decades to build. Customers don't just buy GPUs, they buy reliability, security, they are buying compliance, they are buying billing systems, they are buying developer tools, support, migration assistance, enterprise contracts, global uptime guarantees. Meta can rent compute almost immediately, but becoming AWS is a completely different challenge altogether, and that is where execution becomes difficult. There is another interesting angle to this. Meta still hasn't fully commercialized MuseSpark. Despite spending heavily on AI talent and infrastructure, Meta's direct AI revenue remains relatively limited compared to its advertising business. A cloud platform changes that. Instead of keeping MuseSpark largely internal, Meta can monetize it directly through APIs. Developers pay per token, they pay per request, per workload. And suddenly, Meta gains a second monetization engine beyond advertising. Now, that could prove extremely valuable because investors have spent years asking the same question. How does Meta make money from AI? This could be one answer. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the front page take on it. Meta's cloud ambitions reveal something important about the next phase of AI. The industry is moving from intelligence to infrastructure, from models to monetization, from research to returns. For years, investors worried that Zuckerberg was spending way too much on AI. Now he's showing how those investments might become businesses. And that is why Meta stock jumped while AI cloud stocks fell. Because the market suddenly realized something. Meta may be building the next AI utility. The question now is whether Meta becomes another cloud provider or whether it simply becomes the company that owns the world's largest reserve of AI compute. Either way, one thing is becoming very clear here. In the age of artificial intelligence, compute is no longer just a cost. It is a product, and increasingly, it is a commodity. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Will Meta become the next AWS? Or is building a cloud business much harder than renting spare GPUs? This is Front Page by AM Network. Like, share, and subscribe, and always remember, think AI, think AIM.